biscuits and sweets are usually what fuels us for the first few days. And then you sort of start realizing that you can't just work off sweets and biscuits. If I'm in rehearsals, for instance, I'll like just, eat quite badly. And then I'm like, right, okay, I need to be really good now. And then I'll have like a couple of weeks of like clean eating, and I'll eat lots of vegetables and lots of red meat and protein and stuff. So I try to, it goes through phases, but a lot of it is like sort of pre-planning as well. Some actors are really good with it. Some actors will bring in their lunch and they'll have like rice and chicken, and they'll, have their snacks. And I'm like, wow, you guys are great. Whereas I'm like rushing off to Tesco when I've got like 10 minutes left to get myself a meal deal or something. I'm terrible like that. But I do love good food. And as you know, I love going out for a good meal.
Welcome to A Curious Appetite. I'm Dr. Alessandra Pino. Now, the first time I encountered the work of writer and director Nina Atesh was during a G&T session. Hang on. I mean R&D session. No, not the drink. It's a reading and development workshop for her play In League with the Devil at the Arcola Theatre in East London. I think we had a few drinks afterwards, though. I remember being completely mesmerised by this show. The production is currently in development with Pither Productions. The project centres on the gripping and controversial true story of Erik Jan Hanussen, a 1920s and 30s clairvoyant and mentalist who became famous in the Weimar Berlin and built a dangerous relationship with the rising Nazi party. Atesh developed the script after reading the biography The Nazi Seance by Arthur Majida. There was something deeply magnetic about the central figure at the heart of the work, this elusive character shaped through performance, illusion, charisma, and manipulation. And I could immediately understand the impulse to follow a life like that, into the archive, into research, and eventually onto the stage. There's also something strangely magical about the atmosphere itself. Theatre can be precarious, exhausting, and held together by sheer determination, and yet every now and then it produces moments that feel almost suspended outside ordinary life, as though something unexpected has entered the room. It was also there that I met Kim Newman, whose work on vampires and horror and the Gothic has been hugely influential to me, so the whole evening felt like one of those rare intersections where theatre, illusion, Gothic storytelling and performance all briefly converged. Now, today's episode continues that conversation. I'm joined by Nina Atesh, and we talk about theatre, magic, illusionists, scammers, scripts, and the blurry line between deception and performance, and what draws audiences towards spectacle in the first place. We also talk snacks, because somehow crisps become a serious category of discussion. Childhood food memories appear, as they always seem to do, alongside conversations about rehearsal rooms, writing, and life in theatre. There's also some reminiscing about how much the theatrical world has changed over the years, when the crossover between theatres and pubs was a lot more frequent, and the early days of me going to watch Nina Conti, who is a ventriloquist and who I really love. But a lot has changed in the world of theatre making. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Nina Atesh.
Yeah.
I've been there. I used to go and see Nina Conti.
Oh,
there.
Yes. Yeah. The ventriloquist.
Yes.
Yeah, she's so good. She's so good. They obviously, I've done stuff with them before, like years ago, back when they were a pub theatre, and now they're like a well-established big.
Oh no, because when I used to go, they weren't that well-established. This I'm talking about like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was a pub, literally a pub, and then you went to another room, and there was Nina Conti with all her amazing
puppets.
Amazing, yeah.
So good. No, it's like really good, like that they've kind of like broken out into this like the sort of mid-level stage now of like theatre making. But they're very expensive. Like they basically work on like a flat hire fee, which is great in terms of like it gives the production freedom. We can kind of do whatever we want.
Yeah.
But so like we're not constrained by like their production values. But yeah, I need like a shit ton of money basically, which we knew
God.
anyway for the production. But no, like my next task now is basically trying to get funding. So I hope you've
Yeah.
got some rich listeners.
Well, we'll be putting a message out there, and you never know, because people want to invest in something that's worthwhile. And for sure, everything you do is worthwhile, Nina. Like I really admire you. Like I went to
Bless you.
your art. Well, how I first saw your work was at a R&D of In League with the Devil at the Arcola Theatre in East London, which is near where I live. So we'll be talking about that a little bit,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
what inspired you really to kind of work on the research for this story, which is all around Erik Jan Hanussen,
Mhm.
correct? How did you get into that? How did you come across this topic? Who is he, first of all? Like,
Who is he? Who is Mr. Hanussen? So Erik Jan Hanussen is a clairvoyant slash illusionist, magician, seer, oracle
wow.
that was alive during the 1920s and early 30s. And he was an Austrian Jew. And he kind of made his name through circus performing, really, at first. And then he got into mind reading and he realized that was much more lucrative
Yes.
and became a very well-renowned and successful mind reader and, made some, I guess, accurate predictions,
Right.
which kind of catapulted him into fame and fortune. And I came across him. I read a book called The Nazi Seance by an author called Arthur J. Majida. And
Now that's an interesting title, Nina.
yes, exactly. I think the full title is The Nazi Seance, The Man in Hitler's Inner Circle, or something like that.
Wow.
The
Okay.
clairvoyant, the clairvoyant in Hitler's Inner Circle. I don't have the title in front of me. But it was a book, it was a biography about his life. It came out in like the early 2000s or 2010 or something like that. But I only picked it up a few years ago. Actually, because I was doing some studying into the occult of the 1920s for another play that I was writing at the time. So I read this book about Hanussen and I was just kind of like blown away by his extremely colourful life, but more just kind of like really intrigued by this man who just had like the biggest balls in terms of like just like relentless chutzpah and managed to kind of like infiltrate these people, the Nazis, as a Jewish man, and was so sure of himself that he could do that and that he could saddle up beside these people. Obviously, like a complete crook, like most psychics. Sorry to say.
You're a skeptic then, Nina, are you?
I'm definitely a skeptic. But yeah, but also, just a complete fraud in some of the antics that he got up to and
Yeah.
some of the
Yes.
stuff that he did. There was this chapter in the book that was aptly titled "This Man Must Be in League with the Devil," and it was about this court trial that happened in Czechoslovakia in 1928 after he was arrested, and the Czech police arrested him because they believed he was a fraud and they believed that he was duping customers out of money and giving them false predictions about really personal stuff, like whether they should sell their house or their farm or get divorced. The police in that area of Czechoslovakia at the time, northern Bohemia, in a town called Litoměřice, they arrested him in the dead of night, and then from that, this huge this trial happened, and he was put on the stand as a fraud, and that was the thing that really gripped me. That was the chapter that
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God.
Because he did a bit of psychic work there while he was in the court.
He did well. I don't want to give the game away, Ali. I don't want to give the play away.
I know. Sorry, because I've seen it. So, and can I just
Yeah.
say something? I was sat directly behind Kim Newman. So I was a little bit entranced by the back of his head and your play at the same time.
Well, that's what I do see. I invite celebrities to my shows. so that people are just like totally immersed. So even if the show isn't good, they're like, well, at least I was sat behind, this incredible author. But yeah, it was just a very captivating moment of his life.
Yeah. And I remember when I spoke to you about the research that you did on Hanussen, you described the process nearly as like you were falling in love with him. And I felt like there was a sort of emotional attachment. Did this kind of shape the way that you saw him and described him as a character, would you say?
I guess so, yeah. I'd never written about a real person before. All my past plays have been, just fictional characters and imagined scenarios. So this was the first time I was ever really writing about someone and researching someone who had lived. And I'd heard that term before, people falling in love with their subjects. And there were like a couple of quotes that I remember reading about like you spend so long with someone that you kind of like form this bond and this attachment. I don't know if I would call it love, especially with Hanussen. Certainly like it's a weird one because he wasn't a good person. He's not a hero in the story. He's an anti-hero, really. He's a villain. So it's hard to you have to like sort of try and find something that you can sympathize with.
Yes.
And my thing as a writer, writing any kind of character, my number one rule, and people will hear me say this all the time, and I say it to all of my like actors and stuff when we get in the room, but my number one rule as a writer is that you have to love your characters, no matter who they are or how small or if they're villains or whatever. You have to love them unconditionally, like a parent. Otherwise, you do a disservice to them when you're writing. So I had to love my version of him, maybe not necessarily the version that lived, but my version of him I had to love. So I had to find something, a vulnerability, I guess, that I could connect with. And I certainly did. Like there definitely were vulnerabilities in him. And my dramaturg who I was working with, she was brilliant, a woman called Penny. And I remember the first day we got into the rehearsal room, when we did the first reading of the script, and Saul, who was playing Hanussen, he was like, God, like, how do I sympathize with this guy? He's such a shit. He was awful. He was awful.
Yeah.
He did all these awful things.
Yeah.
And Penny was like, yeah, but you have to remember, like, the time he was living in, and he'd been through a war, the First World War, and what it was like for men like him, the rise of fascism in Germany and stuff. And she was like, think of him as a survivor and not just a cunning manipulator. And I think that really helped him. And that was what she used to say to me as well. She was like, he's a survivor, just in a very different way.
Yeah. A shout out to all your actors, actually, who were absolutely brilliant. I was mesmerized by each and every one of them. So great job casting them as well.
They were great.
Really, really enjoyed it.
They were great.
And so there's something a little bit uncanny about writing about the dead, especially someone as elusive as Hanussen. So did you ever feel like you were chasing a version of him that just kept shifting?
Oh my God, yes.
Maybe discovering new things as you went along and thinking, wow, now that's changed my perspective on him again.
Yeah, definitely. And because, his life was so sort of shrouded in manipulation and, so even the things that he wrote an autobiography. There's an autobiography of his life that he wrote himself. It's in German, but I had some of it translated, and Majida mentions it quite a lot in the Nazi Seance. But again, like it's so outlandish and ridiculous. And he talks about like being a baby and rescuing his parents from divorce. Like, it's completely delusional.
Yeah.
He had he had such a God complex. So a lot of the stuff that he said was probably just, crazy stories, that just kept getting further and further out of proportion. So you had to take everything that you found out about him with quite a large pinch of salt. But then not only that, other stuff that people wrote about him, there's lots of like YouTube videos about him, and people are so intrigued by him because he was this Jewish performer, but who was in the inner circle of these high-ranking Nazis.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of, like untrue claims that he was at Hitler's side at certain rallies, or that like he trained him and schooled him in how to talk to crowds and stuff. But like none of that was actually ever proven. And there's actually very, very little evidence that Hanussen ever actually met Hitler. So a lot of that gets kind of blown out of proportion as well. People obviously love the darker side of Nazism, and there was a lot of like links with the occult, and they were obsessed with that side of things. And apparently Hitler really liked to read his horoscope and yada yada yada.
Right.
But you have to kind of, as a researcher or as a writer, you do have to kind of strip it back to reality as well and be like, okay, what kind of play am I trying to write here? Am I writing something that's really fantastical? And am I going to go, that next level and really over exaggerate his life? Or am I going to bring it back to reality and show a little bit of the real man actually that lived behind this curtain of illusion?
That's what I was going to ask you. Like, is there a time that you thought, oh God, I've gone just a little bit too far down this rabbit hole now? And you found out some fact that you were like, I wish I didn't know this. Was there anything that you found out?
Yeah, definitely. Because there was some really dark stuff, and especially one of the characters in the play, which you'll know was a Nazi called Heldorf, who was his kind of bestie in the circle. And Heldorf features in the play as a sort of narrator. And I did quite a lot of research. Again, he was a real person, a real Nazi that lived, and he became police chief of Berlin. And his character, like Hanussen, is very, very grey and ambiguous, and it was really hard to kind of figure him out. And he, was kind of like a bit of a model Nazi at the beginning, came from an aristocratic family, blue-blooded, great poster boy, tall, blonde, blue-eyed, quite handsome German. But then he had this kind of turn at the end and became a sort of fighter against the regime, resistance fighter. So reading about them and the kind of antics that they got up to together. And Heldorf was a big gambler as well, so he had lots of gambling debts and stuff, which Hanussen kind of paid off.
Right.
So he kind of bought him as a friend. Going down that rabbit hole, and that was kind of, I had to kind of pull myself out of that a little bit, because I was like, oh, some of the stuff that I'm reading is not very pleasant, and also not, if it's not relevant to the play, if it's not relevant to what I'm putting in, it was like, I don't need to read this stuff about these horrible.
I feel like as researchers, it's good to know as much as you can, and then you sort of the job that you do then is to kind of trim it down for it to make sense in what it is that you want to insert in your play. And that is a huge job. Yeah,
I think if you're gonna write a well-rounded character, I think you have to know as much about the character as possible. Because we're not. This might be controversial, but I don't think people are just evil or just good. There is good and evil in everyone, perhaps even the worst of people. And so, you have to find those levels, especially if you're writing a play, if you're writing characters that are going to be on stage, you can't just be one tone. So Hanussen couldn't just be even with Heldorf, the Nazi, he can't just be evil all the way through. Yeah. There has to be some level with it. So,
and do you find this is a bit of a thread with your work, where you want to portray the ambiguity, because that's really what makes characters interesting sometimes? Is there anything else you've done where you kind of have that as a theme, nearly?
Yeah, pretty much with all my writing, really. All of my characters are very ambiguous, and I never really write. It's interesting because most of my plays, or my last two sort of full-length ones anyway, the main characters were kind of villains, really. Not villains, but again, kind of like Hanussen, like anti-heroes. And I guess it's that. What really fascinates me about humanity is that we are ambiguous, like just naturally. We have temptations, and everyone has it within them to be bad, but everyone has it within them to be good as well. And that's always, I've kind of become known as being a bit of a horror writer. I don't know if that's the right word for it. I wouldn't call myself a horror writer, but the horror that fascinates me is human horror. Yes. and psychological horror. And so that's kind of that's kind of the route I always take. So I do always write ambiguous characters, even if they're the good guys.
Yeah.
They're still a little bit problematic, kind of like the lawyer in the show as well. And his lawyer that comes in, he is probably the goodest, in inverted commas, character in the play. But he's also a defense lawyer. So like, can a defense lawyer be good? I don't know. And he defended Hanussen, who was quite clearly a crook and a fraud.
Yes.
But there was a bit of a hunger, I think, with him in terms of his ambition. So yeah, that's what we find fascinating, right?
It really is, yeah.
We don't want to see heroes and villains anymore. I think people like to see the ambiguity.
Yes, I agree with you on that. And what I particularly liked about watching it on stage was that he was someone who was intertwined with providing this idea of illusion and theatricality, and you really showed that on stage. I don't know if you could tell us a bit about how you created this sense of spectacle, or would it be giving too much away? Because there are a few tricks that happen, aren't there? Can we mention Simon?
We can mention Simon. Oh, 100%.
I'm talking about Simon Drake, who has House of Magic in Kennington, South London, and he assisted in some way. Tell me a little bit about what happened there, because I was just blown away. And I've been to Simon's shows. I think they are amazing and I highly recommend them. I mean, he's an illusionist himself and he has people there who are also just incredible. But yeah, what was his part in this?
So yeah, Simon Drake is a magician that's been around for a long time. He's been working on the scene since the 70s, I think, I want to say, without offending him. But he was sort of a pioneer of illusionary magic, and he's a friend of mine. And when I told him about the idea that I had for this play, he was really fascinated, and he'd never heard of Hanussen, which I was really surprised by, because Simon knows everything to do with magic. He's like an encyclopedia of magic, basically. He's really great. And yeah, his house is incredible, the House of Magic in Kennington. And he still does shows to this day. I'm just giving a little bit of a promo for Simon here.
Why not?
But yeah, he helped me, him and another magician called Graham Jolly, who's also a brilliant mind reader, because Simon is more of an illusionist and Graham Jolly is a mind reader magician. They helped me with kind of how Hanussen worked, really, and how he did what he did. And yeah, it's a little bit of a spoiler alert. But the thing that Hanussen did in the courtroom, in the trial, was that he kind of demonstrated his abilities as a mind reader. And so I was like, well, I have to put that in the play. So yeah, Simon and Graham both assisted me with some tricks with sort of what we could do in the play that was similar to what Hanussen did in the courtroom. They're not exactly the same, because what Hanussen did in the courtroom is actually a bit more dull than what we actually did on stage.
It was brilliant. I looked around and everyone in the audience just had their mouths open. We didn't know how that had happened, and I know for a fact that it was not in any way pre-arranged, because of something was thrown into the audience to randomly select, and it actually fell in at my feet, and I gave it to my neighbour he was my friend, Professor Neil Martin, who got up and went on stage, and he had no idea what he was about to do. And I was blown away. It was brilliant.
Yeah, that's something that from the start I knew that that had to be the kind of climactic finale of the show. Amazing. And again, Saul, who played Hanussen, massive props to him for pulling it off, because we had very limited time to practice it, and all of the actors were really incredible with how they managed to bring it together. But
the trick was not revealed, and we don't know. I mean, I don't know how it was, and that's not the point. It was just incredible to watch. And
the tricks don't get revealed. I'm sworn to secrecy, but that's the whole point, is that you're supposed to then believe, oh my God, yeah, he does have this ability, he does have these powers.
And it made me think how vulnerable we are, because imagine seeing something like that, and then in the presence of someone who has this I'm doing air quotes power, but it is putting people sometimes in a vulnerable position. Do you think that there are still people like Hanussen around, maybe not practicing this kind of magic, let's call it, but people that have an influence? and on people today.
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely. Well, again, at the risk of being controversial, but I mean, like some like religious leaders, not, I'm talking like sort of the little subsections of religion, cults and things like that.
Yes.
You get these leaders that have this kind of like natural charisma, that prey on vulnerable people. And that's what Hanussen did. He preyed on people's vulnerabilities.
Yes.
And, people that go to psychics and people that go to these people are looking for answers naturally, and they want to be told something. So, of course, if someone is telling you something that maybe either you do or you don't want to hear, you're going to take it because
Yeah.
you've stooped to the desperation of going to see a psychic for it.
Yeah.
So he knew that, and he exploited that. And again, it was the same with his Nazi friend Heldorf. Heldorf was vulnerable because he had a gambling addiction, and he was
Yes.
he believed in Hanussen. There's no question of that. Like, he believed what he could do and was mesmerized by him and was pulled in, intoxicated by him. And that was how Hanussen got into that. That was how he infiltrated that. He paid his debts, and he said, don't worry, you can rely on me, I'll help you out. And so he exploited that vulnerability. And then Heldorf was in debt to Hanussen in a different way. So that was how he worked. It's like coercive behavior. And that 100% still exists today. Yeah, maybe not in that, like you said, in that way of, with magicians and seers and stuff, because I think people see through that a lot, and much more than they used to in the 1920s. But it certainly still exists. I mean, look at like influencers and stuff online. It's just a different way, like tech bros and things like that. People get sucked in through those channels.
Yes.
If Hanussen had lived today, and I've heard historians say this a lot about like Hitler and the Nazi regime as well, is that if they had lived now, they would have been like tech experts. They would have been social media moguls.
Yes.
And Hitler would have been all over like X and Instagram and stuff, because that was what he did. He was a bit sort of rock and roll in that way, in that he was like photographed all the time, and he was in magazines and on cigarette cards and stuff. It was like, that was quite new age for them.
Yeah.
And Hanussen would have been the same. He would have been a bit of an Elon Musk type of character. He would have known how to work social media. He would have known how to get in front of people. That was what he did. So yeah, unfortunately, people like that do still exist in a very, very different way.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing this on stage again, not just as an R&D, but as a full-blown performance. What can we do? What do you need? Maybe give us an insight into how it works for you as a writer, as a producing it, directing it. What are the steps that you need to take now? Because it's an excellent production. I'm sure there will be revisions because I know you were working on it. But then what are the next steps for you as a director and kind of head of the project?
So we're looking for a venue. So obviously the performance that you saw was an R&D, like you said, and it was in development then, which was in November. It's still kind of in development now, but it's also kind of ready to take to the next level. My ambition is for it to go on stage next year, like sort of this time next year, spring 2027.
Yeah.
We're in discussions with a couple of different theatres, sort of mid-level off West End theatres. And we're having a few really exciting discussions about putting it on stage. Unfortunately, as with all things in England, in the arts, when it comes to the arts, it all comes down to money. And we need an investor of some kind, or a co-producer, to believe in the project and put their faith in it and their money. And that's kind of what we need, really, in terms of, everything is kind of ready and set to go. Like we've got a team, we've got a fantastic team of people, we've got some really brilliant actors, we've got the content, and now we just need the investment, really.
The investment for it, yes.
To take it to the next stage. I do believe it will happen. I really have faith in it. But yeah, that's where we're at now. But my hopes is for this time next year to be talking about it and telling people to buy tickets, basically.
Will you come back and talk to me about it again again then when you when it goes back on stage.
Absolutely.
I'm so
Yeah.
looking forward to that. My fingers are crossed because it really deserves to be on stage. It's brilliant.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
So this podcast is called A Curious Appetite. And because I'm very curious, Nina, and I know you, so I know all these things, but our listeners don't. And I want to tell them that you are Canadian born, you're Turkish Cypriot in your background, and you live in London now. What foods feel more like home to you? Where is that home when you think about it when it comes to food?
Mm. Well, I'm quite lucky. I grew up with two parents who were both quite good cooks and who knew how to cook and use ingredients. And my dad, especially my baba, who, yeah, is a Cypriot, he was a brilliant cook and he could make. And like he could make something out of nothing. Like he could look in the fridge and see something and just be like, oh, I'll whip something up. So for him, of growing up, we lived in Cyprus for a little bit. It was always, he made really good barbecue food.
Oh,
Like
nice.
he could like slap on like some lamb chops. He'd do fish. His salads were really good as well. I mean, like Mediterraneans really know how to make a salad, as
Yes.
you well know,
Yes.
as an Italian.
Yeah.
So, just like being able to use any kind of ingredient to like the right taste, just stuff that I wouldn't be able to do now, even as an adult. But yeah, like lamb and salad and anything that's been like charcoal grilled really feels like lovely. Like there's kind of like a lovely, like summery, homely feeling to that growing up in some of the villages that we grew up in Cyprus. But also like on the other side as well, because yeah, I kind of grew up between two countries and between two cultures. So, my mum used to make a like every Sunday, used to make a roast dinner every Sunday with the family coming over. So anytime I would go home back to Kent, which is where my parents live now, my mum lives now, that kind of like smell of roast meat and roast vegetables, and that it was a really homely feeling. But yeah, growing up Cypriot, everything happened in the kitchen. So everyone would congregate in the kitchen. My aunties, I have like 5 aunties. Whenever we went to visit them, it was the kitchen we would sit in. It wasn't the living
I
room.
love it. Yes.
So it was around the kitchen table with them smoking, them cooking. There was always something cooking. Yeah, in Cypriot culture, if you're going over to someone's house, you don't go over for like a cup of tea or a drink. You go over to eat. There's always some food on the table. So yeah, so I'm lucky. I grew up with really good food, and now I have a really good appetite for food.
That's good. There was one thing that I thought, talking to people, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but when I was a child, I don't think I snacked as much as I did now. We didn't really have that snack culture. And as well, going in between Mediterranean countries, I don't feel like, that was a thing. And I wondered, I mean, now I do snack generously. And I wondered if you had changed your habits too, and what was your favorite snack?
My parents were quite good with sort of not, I mean, they didn't like feed me junk food and stuff. Like I didn't have a chicken Kiev until I was like a lot older, because my mum considered them like, those little mini, like Bernard Matthews Kievs. My mum would die before she fed me one of those. Like I just like, whereas I would see like other English kids having them, and I was like, they look so good. Why can't I have them? So like when I was at uni, the moment I was away from home and independent, I would eat like just the most horrendous food. But I did snack. My biggest snack as a kid was crisps.
Yes.
And I still eat them now. Like,
I love them.
I love a good bag of crisps.
What's your favorite flavor?
Oh, probably smoky bacon.
Nice.
Something hammy, something meaty. But yeah, growing up in Cyprus, because it's so hot there, we used to go to the beach like every day. So like during the summer, even after school, my mum would take me out of school and we'd go to the beach, and me and my mum and my dad would hang out at the beach, and I'd be playing by the pool, and that was what we did. That was what we spent our days doing. And so after swimming, as a treat, I would always get a bag of crisps. Like that was like the post-swim treat, and like, like a Fanta or something. So that was like my bubba's treat for me was usually a bag of like Ruffles or Lay's. So that was probably the one snack that I grew up having. I wasn't a big like sweetie
No,
kid.
more
like
savory.
Yeah, definitely more savory. I
Yeah.
don't mind sweets now, but I have some friends that are like, oh, I'm craving some sweets, and they'll get a bag of sweets, and I would usually go for like something savory over a sweet treat.
Obviously, I see your work. You're often doing quite long rehearsal days from what I can see. I could see one of your posts recently. You were doing a new production and it looks like you work very long hours. And I just wondered during rehearsal days, what's the food looking like? Or maybe you don't eat much during those hours. What kind of keeps you going? The secrets of food in the behind the
Mm.
scenes?
Secrets of food in the rehearsal room. Well, I mentioned that I don't do sweets, but actually my like tradition when I come
Yeah.
in for the first day of rehearsals, if we're doing table work, so if we're doing like script reading, I'll always bring some sweets for the actors, and I'll
Oh,
always bring some biscuits. So biscuits and sweets are usually what
nice.
fuels us for the first few
Yes.
days, and then you sort of start realizing that you can't just work off sweets and biscuits. But then you're like, okay, I need to get some nuts, and I need to get some like slow release for like bananas, and I
Good.
need to eat some like slow release stuff. So I try and be good. I'm quite bad really, and my schedule, as you know, like I work a
Yeah.
few different jobs. And I love cooking. I actually do love to cook when I have the time and when my kitchen is clean. But both of those things don't happen very often.
No,
So I
I'm
usually
with you
just
on that.
kind of go for fast food or stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I go through like little phases. I'll have like a
Yeah.
week. If I'm in rehearsals, for instance, I'll like just, eat quite badly. And then I'm like, right, okay, I need to be really good now. And then I'll
Yeah.
have like a couple of weeks of like clean eating, and I'll eat lots of vegetables and lots of red meat and protein and stuff.
Yeah.
So I try to, yeah, it goes through phases, but a lot of it is like sort of pre-planning as well. Some actors are really good with it. Some actors will bring in their lunch, and they'll have like
Yes.
rice and chicken, and
Yes.
they'll, have their snacks, and I'm like, wow, you guys are great. Whereas I'm like rushing off to Tesco when I've got like 10 minutes left to get myself a meal deal or
Yeah.
something. I'm terrible like that. But I do love good food, and as you know, I love going out for a good meal in good
Absolutely.
restaurants.
We've
And
enjoyed it. We've enjoyed a few. But can you tell us what you're doing at the moment? What can we look forward to next when it comes to you? What projects are you working on?
so I do have a project that I'm working on at the moment with a friend of mine, who's also a writer and a performer. It's an anthology of short horror. Again, I use the word horror, but
Yeah.
psychologically disturbing plays, four different pieces that are about 10 minutes in length. It's called Uncle Monty's Antique Shop.
Nice.
And it's probably going to be, we're again waiting to hear from a couple of different venues, but we're hoping to put it on either in this summer, or in October time, sort of in the
Right.
lead up to Halloween.
Lovely.
So that's something I'm working on at the moment. That's quite exciting, much smaller scale than In League with the Devil,
Yeah.
but just as exciting. So that's the most upcoming thing that I have,
Fab.
and then it will just be back to getting In League with the Devil up and
Yeah.
running, really.
I really, my fingers are crossed for that and for all your projects because they're so great, Nina. And where can people see what you're doing and what you're getting up to on social media, Instagram?
Yeah, so my production company is called Pither Productions, Pither. If you just Google it, it'll come up. Pither Productions. We've got a website, we've got an Instagram, but yeah, we have a mailing list that you can subscribe to, and just keep up with our Instagram, and we do all our announcements on there.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Nina. It's been so lovely speaking to you.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you for having me.
See you soon.
Bye.
This has been A Curious Appetite, podcast about food, memory, and the strange ways in which what we eat begins to shape who we are. If you enjoyed this episode, you can follow, rate, and share it wherever you listen. It makes more of a difference than you think. You can also find more reflections on essays and behind-the-scenes material on my Substack and my website, alessandrapino.com, and YouTube channel, A Curious Appetite Podcast with Dr. Alessandra Pino. Oh, and if you have any suggestions or ideas or something you'd like me to explore, do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. The email address is acuriousappetite@gmail.com.